The Australian Media Hall of Fame concept came out of the challenge that the internet made to the business models that have supported the cost of great journalism in this country for 2 centuries. People were going to be asked to pay in new ways if quality journalism was to survive in anything like the depth of the last 50 years. There was a need to show that quality journalism was worth paying for, that it was good value for money, that it had great community benefit. So the Hall of Fame was designed to show how some of society's greatest improvements were brought about, at least in part, through the work of journalists, and how many of history's great exposures of injustice and corruption came about through relentless journalism. Media outlets are experts at blowing their own individual trumpets, and sometimes that lacks credibility because it is so self-serving, but they're not so good at coming together as an orchestra to explain the benefits of quality journalism as a whole. The Melbourne Press Club was an ideal vehicle for the Hall of Fame because of its ecumenical structure and because its primary purpose is to celebrate excellence in journalism. The Hall of Fame tells the history of the successes of Australian journalism through the stories of some remarkable individuals who have helped shape the course of their craft, their colleagues, their community, their city, their state, their nation, and in some cases the world. Or they've simply been the best in their generation. The Hall of Fame follows the journalistic principle that great stories are best told through people. 2 years ago, we completed the foundation induction to the Victorian Media Hall of Fame with 81 individuals. Since then, we're now working on the New South Wales inductions. My fellow judges for the New South Wales inductions are Mark Day from the Australian, Bridget Griffin-Foley, media historian from Macquarie University, Mike Bowers of The Guardian and formerly pictorial chief of the SMH, and Kate Tawney herself from the State Library and ex-ABC. We've already selected 30 individuals covering the period up to about 1930 in New South Wales, and their names will be announced in Sydney in the new year. Then we'll announce the rest of the New South Wales inductions towards the end of next year before moving on to other states. And there'll be a new edition of the book Media Legends, which has 81 chapters on the Victorian inductees. After that, I'd expect there'd be periodic inductions to the Hall of Fame, and we hope temporary or permanent displays in other cities, similar to the one that has been at the State Library of Victoria for the last 12 months. Cartoonists, along with war correspondents, are disproportionately represented in the Hall of Fame. In both categories, Australia has punched above its weight. For many decades, Australian artists, writers and cartoonists felt they had to go back to the mother country or some other big pond to be fully appreciated. 2 of the world's most widely syndicated cartoonists are Australians, Pat Oliphant and the late Paul Rigby, who Paul, incidentally, was also notable for having founded the Limp Falling Association in Perth. Perhaps Australia's greatest cartoonist, Will Dyson, went to London because the Bulletin wouldn't give him a job. Dyson was described in London as the greatest thing ever produced by Australia. His depiction of the turn-of-the-century capitalist as an obscene, dinner-suited, cigar-smoking, threatening monster in spats was so widely copied that it became a cliche. One of his favourite subjects for that bloated caricature was a Victorian Premier, Tommy Bent. Never has a public figure been so appropriately named. As Railways Commissioner, Bent approved a state railway line out to his properties in Cheltenham to inflate their values. As Railways Minister, he offered to do the same for other MPs if they voted for him in leadership tussles. As a key figure in the land boom, he once flipped a property in the city for a 30% capital gain in just a few hours. Tommy Bent offers a clue about why politicians appear so thick-skinned and seemingly unperturbed in the face of sometimes monstrous caricatures by cartoonists. One night, Bent walked into a pub where Dyson was drinking with a group of artists. His fellow drinkers dared Dyson to introduce himself to Bent, and the artist had enough drink to accept that dare. And what's more, he even mentioned to Bent that he was grateful for the opportunities he'd given him to earn a living as a cartoonist. Dyson anticipated an explosion. Instead, Bent asked him if he wanted a drink. When Dyson expressed surprise at such tolerance, the Premier laughed out loud, "Bless you, lad. When a man's been bombarded with brickbats for 40 years, he doesn't mind being tickled with a feather, even if it has a little ink on it." There have been several great eras of political cartooning. The Bulletin from the 1880s was the first news magazine to publish political cartoons, and it became a fountainhead, producing some of the greats. The early years of the 20th century were another great period when, with cartoonists having a profound influence on public opinion on great issues like women's suffrage, the Boer War, conscription, and the fight between capital and labour. In our lifetimes, the 1970s and 1980s was another wonderful era, coinciding with a huge increase in interest in politics brought about by the Vietnam War and the Whitlam agenda and his subsequent demise. At one point in the mid to late 80s, The Age had the following cartoonists in its stable: Les Tanner, Bruce Petty, Arthur Horner, Ron Tanberg, Peter Nicholson, John Spooner, and Michael Leunig. Horner for a time worked in London, where he created Colonel Pewter, but by the 1970s the others did not feel they had to go overseas to be appreciated. 3 of them are already in the Hall of Fame. I doubt whether there's ever been a greater group of cartoonists assembled anywhere in the one place. The question now is, could it ever happen again? Just getting back to New South Wales for a moment, in our research up there, we think we've identified Australia's first press freedom fighter. When we reflect on the anti-authority nature of the Australian character and in the Australian media, down here in Victoria we tend to reference Eureka, but its roots go back a long way further. The first newspaper in the colony of New South Wales was literally a government gazette. The second was a bit more independent, but still reliant on the governor's largesse for news and newsprint. The third newspaper was the Monitor, established in 1826 by Edward Smith Hall. As editor for the next 14 years, he campaigned for trial by a jury and a popularly elected legislature while fighting the oppression of convicts, public immorality by public officers, and the conduct of Governor Darling himself. Hall was the first Australian to be jailed for criminal libel of a public official, and Governor Darling tried to impose licensing and taxing of newspapers to silence him and other critics. Hall lobbied London, and Darling's moves were blocked. So for a time, the Australian press was freer than the English press. Darling later blamed Hall for his recall to London after Hall petitioned decision-makers in Britain. Thus, Governor Darling became the first recorded case of shooting the messenger. I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that Edward Smith Hall will certainly be in the Hall of Fame, but so will many more cartoonists. Thank you.